We have all speakers already joined in, uh, except one speakers from Thailand. And we have our colleagues from Philippines, Della, as one of the facilitator, and also Alpha from Malaysia.
Excellent.
We have all speakers already joined in.
And Ernie, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you, are you going to sort of MC in between?
Yes, so Ratna Fitriani will be our MC. She's from PPDI, Indonesia.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. I'm sure you guys discussed when I was on vacation.
Yeah. Mas. Ini dari sini.
Itu nggak masuk. Mbak, aku lift sebentar bisa? Bluetooth-nya bermasalah. Nanti saya masuk lagi.
Boleh, Sin.
Oke, thank you ya.
Ya.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. We will start our discussion in 5 minutes again. Okay. Good morning, all participants and speaker. How are you today? We wish you all great and healthy. To begin with, let me introduce myself. My name is Ratna Fitriani. I'm Coordinator of International Relation and Cooperation of the Indonesian Disabled Person Organization, or PPDI, which is one of Agenda Partner Network for the program to promote ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025 in Indonesia. Welcome to our webinar on women leadership and participation in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the lives of women in Southeast Asia. Before we proceed, please allow me to convey several points for the arrangement of this webinar. Firstly, this webinar will be recorded. So if you have certain concern with regards the recording process, please kindly write your concern in the chat box, or you can inform us through email later on. Secondly, we also provide sign language interpretation and closed caption to ensure the inclusivity and the need of the participant can be properly accommodated. We recommend adjust by put sign language interpretation in speaker view. To access closed caption, you can select Show Closed Caption on the bottom of your screen. And you can also adjust the caption size in the setting. We would also suggest to all speakers to speak in moderate speed to allow the interpretation and typist process can be done appropriately. Thirdly, this webinar also run through live streaming in the Agenda YouTube Asia channel. Aligning with this shared theme of the International Women's Day, Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, the General Election Network for Disability Access, or Agenda, the IFES flagship of Regional Disability Rights Program, which is funded by the Australian government and the US government, organized this webinar to provide platform for stakeholders including ASEAN government, the private sector, parliament members, donor agencies, civil society organization, which focusing on women's rights, disabled person organization, women leaders, advocates, and activists. This webinar aims to enhance engagement stakeholders and share challenges, best practices, and lessons learned from their effort in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on women, reducing the gender gap, and protecting women's rights in their respective countries. The webinar is organized with the support from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT, of the Australian government. So, without further ado, now we will start the opening session. And please welcome Ms. Melika Acik, Deputy Regional Director, Asia and Pacific of IFES. Ms. Melika, the time is yours now.
Thank you very much, Ratna. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening to those of us in the United States still on a Monday. Welcome to you all to this webinar that Ratna just introduced. So I will spare the introduction. Welcome to our honorary keynote speaker and the esteemed panelists. As Ratna mentioned, I am the Deputy Director for our Asia Pacific region at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES. And we are organizing this webinar to be in line with the International Women's Day theme of focusing on women's leadership and participation and impact of COVID-19 and generally this global pandemic on it. I wanted to also thank our donors that Ratna already mentioned, both DFAT, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, but also Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights and Labor Affairs of the United States Department of State that is funding the agenda programming in the region. And without their support, this webinar will also not be possible. So, thank you again and welcome, and I look forward to a really good, fruitful discussion on this topic. As we all know, since the World Health Organization announced the coronavirus pandemic a little bit over a year ago, people worldwide have been facing systemic human development crises that heighten existing inequalities, especially for marginalized groups. This is especially true for women and girls who are marginalized, including women with disabilities. In Southeast Asia, the World Economic Forum 2020 Global Gender Gap Report stated that progress towards greater gender equality and closing the gender gap since 2006 has been slow, with only 2.5 percentage point gain each year. The Association of Southeast Asian Nation ASEAN report on gender outlook showed evidence that women and girls who are living in the poorest households or rural areas or who are of minority ethnicity face multiple disadvantages. Many of these women and girls have lower incomes, less decision-making power, and limited access to basic services and infrastructure. The protection of the rights of marginalized groups has become one of the critical elements of ASEAN development agenda, especially during the pandemic. It is crucial, therefore, to ensure equal economic opportunities, equal access to healthcare and other basic services for all women and girls, and that these are promoted and appropriately protected during and also post-pandemic. And let's hope we are all in the post-pandemic world pretty soon. For IFES to accomplish its mission, and our mission is to build democracy that delivers for all people, we know that promoting gender equality and women's empowerment is a cornerstone of that work. IFES both implements standalone programming to increase women's participation in public life. For example, we have our Power to Persuade advocacy trainings for women with disabilities. Many of our participants in today's call, I know, have participated and given this training to other beneficiaries. But we also make sure that principles of women's rights and gender equality are included throughout all our programs to ensure that women benefit equally and meaningfully from all of our work. At IFES and throughout our programming, we really try to work to break down women's individual barriers for participation and engage with institutions, male allies, and other community members to create an enabling environment for women to participate in all aspects of political life. As part of these efforts, we've partnered with women around the world to increase their participation in decision-making processes to mitigate the unfavorable impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on their lives, and to ensure their perspectives and experiences are taken into account when designing policies and responses to the pandemic. As Ratna has mentioned, this webinar aims to create a venue for sharing best practices, challenges, and lessons learned in mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on women, reducing the gender gap, and protecting women's rights. The webinar gathers representatives from ASEAN sectoral bodies, private sectors, parliament members, donor agencies, civil society organizations, all focusing on women's rights, disabled people organization, women leaders, advocates, activists, etc. And I do not want to take too much more time because I am excited to hear what the panelists have to say. I'm excited to hear what participants have to ask, and I really look forward to the upcoming discussion. Happy Women's Month to us all, and hopefully we continue this important work, and not hopefully, for sure we continue this important work throughout the year and throughout years to come. And I'll turn over to Ratna to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Melika. Now, let's hear another remark from the Ms. Gillian Ray, the Counselor of Australian Mission to ASEAN in DFAT. Ms. Gillian, the stage is yours now.
Thank you very, very much. On behalf of the Australian Government, it's my pleasure to join today's webinar to discuss women's leadership and participation in mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 on the lives of women in Southeast Asia. Firstly, I'd like to thank our disability partners, IFES and Agenda, for hosting this event. We greatly appreciate the extra effort it takes during these challenging times, and I'd especially like to thank Malaika Atik, IFES Deputy Director for Asia and the Pacific, for her thoughtful remarks. Unfortunately, I agree with you, progress has been slow. I noted your comment that only 2.1 percentage points improvement each year. But in good news, we see that it is a critical element of ASEAN in the pandemic response. And it is, I couldn't agree more, that it's crucial to provide the economic opportunities and access to services for women. And I was really heartened to hear that gender inclusiveness is critical to achieving all other development outcomes. It really resonated with me with your approach to take a gender equal approach to all your programming, because that's certainly something that Australia strives to do as well. I really look forward to hearing our keynote speaker today, Her Excellency and AICHA representative for Indonesia, Ibu Yuyun Wayiningram, and I warmly welcome other distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants for joining across ASEAN for today's discussion. Like Malaika, I can't wait to get into it. International Women's Day is an opportunity, and I like the way Malaika put it as International Women's Month, but it's an opportunity to celebrate the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The day marks a collective call to action for accelerating gender parity, and Australia is extremely pleased to support these efforts. This year's theme of Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World helps us explore the pandemic from different perspectives. It provokes us to consider what women and men in positions of leadership can do, particularly for the most vulnerable, including women, girls, and people with disabilities, and to encourage the voices of the most vulnerable to be heard and incorporated in recovery plans to build a more equal COVID-19 world. I've been really heartened to hear this reference to in many ASEAN events lately as building back better. And it doesn't necessarily mean with bricks and mortar after a natural disaster, but in some of these underlying challenges that we have to face. Unfortunately, women and persons with disabilities continue to face significant cultural, socioeconomic, and political barriers to leadership roles in the region. I look forward to hearing from the experiences of our esteemed panel of women leaders on these issues and better understand how we can focus our efforts to increase leadership opportunities for women and persons with disabilities. To celebrate this year's International Women's Day, our ambassador to ASEAN, Mr. Wilnang Kervis, led a social media campaign to profile influential women leaders in ASEAN. I am very pleased to say this included Agenda's Program Manager, Ibu Ernie Andriani, who outlined what women in leadership means for her in the context of disability inclusion. Australia is committed to working with ASEAN in the response to COVID-19 and its recovery. This is well articulated in our COVID-19 development strategy, Partnerships for Recovery, and supported by ministerial commitments announced last year. These have included a $23 million package of assistance in June at the special foreign ministers meeting, ASEAN-Australia foreign ministers meeting on COVID, but it's just been built on even further throughout the rest of the year, with another $80 million announced in September by foreign ministers, a $523 million vaccine initiative announced in October, and also our Prime Minister's announceables in the ASEAN Leaders Summit, which was another nearly $500 million of support. Our work in the region has a strong emphasis on mitigating the pandemic impacts for the most vulnerable. Our gender-responsive policies and programs support ASEAN's own effort to mainstream gender equality and disability inclusion. Our projects align with ASEAN's comprehensive recovery framework and as the region's pathway out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Wherever possible, we encourage our partners and stakeholders to promote gender equality, disability inclusion in all their activities. We continue to work with partners to empower women leaders through our investments. For example, our ASEAN-Australia Political Security Partnership is supporting ASEAN's Women, Peace and Security agenda. This WPS project is about research and analysis that should contribute to a better understanding of ASEAN's needs and priorities in WPS, and is helping to inform a gender-sensitive response to COVID-19. Also, our Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia commitment helps host relevant webinars, for example, on the crucial role of women entrepreneurship and in post-pandemic recovery. We are also extremely proud to be supporting our regional disability partners and ASEAN to implement the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan. Our disability rights in ASEAN investment continues to support organisations representing people with disabilities to engage with ASEAN, to promote their rights, and continue the important analysis on disability inclusion, gender equality, and COVID-19. The efforts of ASEAN and its member states to uphold the rights of people with disabilities is commendable. These obligations are outlined in the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan. They're reinforced by action points to help guide implementation and can be used to maximise the effectiveness of COVID-19 responses and recovery. We continue to encourage the active involvement of persons with disability in the Master Plan's implementation, and we are pleased to see that we have such strong women leaders working together in this effort to ensure that no one is left behind in the COVID-19 responses. I welcome this opportunity for Australia to support women in leadership and persons with disabilities to explore and mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on their lives. Together, we celebrate important progress and we renew our joint commitments to close the gender equality gap at home, at work, and in our communities. I'm really thrilled to be here today to discuss these issues and look forward to getting into the conversation. Thanks all.
Thank you, Ms. Gillian. And now, before we move further, we will make a fun thing. The organizer committee will take a photograph. So for all participants, could you please turn on your video? Nisa or Mas Eko?
Okay, Mbak Pipit.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, please turn on your video, and I'll be taking the first photo of the first page of my Zoom meeting in 3, 2, 1, smile. Wait a second. And then I'll be taking for the second page in 3, 2, 1, smile. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nisa. And now, please welcome our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum, the representative of Indonesia to ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Ibu Yuyun, the stage is yours now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malaika Atik, Deputy Regional Director, Asia Pacific IFAS, Ms. Gillian Ray, Consular Australian Mission to ASEAN DFAT, all speakers, organizers, participants, translators, interpreters. Good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening. Thank you for having me today. It is an honor to address to you this morning in the webinar on women leadership and participation in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the lives of women in Southeast Asia, in the occasion of celebrating the International Women's Day 2021. I also would like to take this opportunity to express my admiration to the women in Myanmar who are fighting and defending for democracy, rule of law, and human rights for the country. I also would like to send my condolences to the mothers, sisters, and aunts whose family members have left us. As assigned by the organizer, I shall talk about increasing women's participation in upholding women's human rights in ASEAN during and after pandemic. The topic that is not only important but timely in the line and in line with the ASEAN priorities. In anticipating some technical difficulties, so I prepared PowerPoint presentation to accompany my speech today, and I will start my share screen now. Okay, this one. Wait, let me check. Let me check this. Is it one? Oh yeah. All right. So I recognize that there will be interpreter and also the typist. So I'm preparing this for them to make it easier for participants to follow. ASEAN is committed to promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls in all aspects, as you can see in ASEAN Charter, ASEAN Community Vision 2025, as well as the ASEAN Community Blueprint 2025. ASEAN acknowledge women's role and contribution not only on socioeconomic development, but also on the maintenance of peace and security in the region. ASEAN has agreed to mainstream gender equality and women empowerment into the development process of the ASEAN Community Post-2025 Vision by asking more and greater cross-sectoral collaboration and support are needed, as well as to form an ASEAN-led mechanism and cooperation. As we can see, more and more cross-sectoral cooperation and meeting among different sectoral bodies, including the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, to discuss and develop further on gender equality as well as women empowerment. At the moment, ASEAN has a regional women agenda by combining the advancement of gender equality, women empowerment, as well as women, peace, and security. ASEAN also come up with the Declaration on Gender Responsive Implementation on the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, which affirms its commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals for realizing sustainable development by ensuring women and girls are equally able to reach the fullest of their potential and enjoying equal access to quality education and healthcare, economic resources, political participation, as well as equal opportunity with men and boys for employment, leadership, and decision making at all levels. The pandemic has deepened pre-existing gender inequality and has disproportionate affected women and girls, such as there has been number of reports on the increase of domestic violence, lack of access to critical health care, and women economic participation. Women issues and women participation have gradually become a center in ASEAN community building, especially during the pandemic. On 12 November 2020, ASEAN organized an ASEAN Women Leaders Summit with the theme of women's role in building a cohesive, dynamic, sustainable, inclusive ASEAN community in the post-COVID-19 world. During the pandemic, women have demonstrated their crucial role in combating COVID-19 as the frontline responders, social workers, health professionals, and community volunteers, as well as caregivers at home and in communities. ASEAN leaders have also acknowledged the importance of enhancing women participation in planning and decision making, mainstreaming their economic and health needs in the national and regional COVID-19 responses and recovery efforts, preventing and combating violence against women and children, especially in the time of crisis, supporting women frontline essential workers, women labor force, and women enterprises. It is only logical that ASEAN member states and ASEAN to adopt inclusive strategies before another crisis strikes. ASEAN has comprehensive recovery framework and its implementation plan, which include the participation of women. These include the measures such as enhancing women participation in decision-making processes with a multi-stakeholders and cross-pillar approach, designing gender-responsive policies to ensure that women are the architect as well as the beneficiaries of efforts to build back stronger and better, building resilience by strengthening women economic empowerment through digital and financial inclusion, recognizing and distributing unpaid care and domestic work, developing inclusive and accessible social protection programs, investing in gender-responsive public and social infrastructure, enhancing welfare and development of all women and girls, and improving their access to opportunity and responding to emerging challenges. Nevertheless, the challenges are about putting commitment into action. It is therefore, there are 5 areas in which I think government need to take immediate action. First is on safety, how to ensure women's safety even during time of crisis and developing innovative methods for reporting violence. Resources. Government need to allocate proper resources to address violence against women and girls at the National COVID-19 Recovery Plan. Government also need to ensure secured space, representation, and visibility of women in the policy change, solution, and recovery. Government also need to build the capacity on, especially on ICT skills for women. Government need also to strengthen advocacy by engaging different actors to address the hindrance of women inclusion in COVID-19 containment and recovery. At this point, ICHR also need to emphasize the importance of the role of women human rights defenders to promote human rights in the region. There are a number of practices already in the region, especially in Asia Pacific. A number of national human rights institutions have put a lot of practices or good practices to include women in the work during the pandemic crisis. So, for instance, instigated good employment practices such as maintenance of salaries, safety at work practices, provision of masks, sanitizer, and hand washing facilities, ensuring the safety of pregnant and lactating mothers, and no redundancies. Involve women staff in decision making at all levels, supported working at home, such as flexible working hours, equipment and internet provision, especially provision for women, including leave to take care of children and other responsibilities, provided alternate work and reporting processes as a result of internet difficulties. Got the views of women staff and commissioners through an internal staff survey and making recommendation accordingly. Regularly communicated across their organization using various face-to-face and synchronistic online platforms. So including women in the recovery plan, especially their leadership, participation, and mitigating the crisis are very important and doable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yuyun, and all speakers in the opening session. And now we are entering the discussion, and my colleague Tolhas Damanik will proceed this session. Bang Tolhas, the time is yours now.
Thank you very much, Mbak Ratna Fitriani. I'd like to start with wishing you very good morning and happy International Women's Day. I think now we are coming to the main session of our event today, and I'm sure that all of us are waiting for the speakers to talk about certain issue with regards to the women participation and leadership during to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. It has been more than 1 year, I guess. The COVID-19 pandemic has been impacted our lives, including lives of women and women with disability around the world, and especially in ASEAN. There are so many efforts have been done by government officials, CSOs, DBOs, individuals to overcome challenges as the result of this pandemic. And we don't know yet how our lives will move forward, because till now the government tried to put a lot of effort to make sure that all citizens will be properly vaccinated to develop the herd immunity. But of course, the question is that how the COVID-19 response and measures already touch the rights of women, girls, women with disability, and all marginalized group. And today, as we're celebrating the International Women's Day, we would like to hear from all distinguished speakers about their experience advocating gender equality, as well as how the women participation and leadership have been a main part of the movement to ensure the right of women, girls, women with disability have been protected during this pandemic. We have 4 speakers for this session, and we would like to start from our first speaker, Ms. Rachel Arini Jasistari. She's Southeast Asia and ASEAN Advocate Program Manager from Forum Asia. And we would like to hear the short biography of Ms. Rachel. So I would like to ask my friends Ratna to read the short bio of Miss Rachel. Go ahead, Ratna.
Thank you, Bang Tohas. Okay, so now all participants, we have 4 bright speakers today, all the women leaders in Southeast Asia. And the first speaker is Rahel Arini Yudhistari, is the East Asia and ASEAN Manager for the ASEAN Forum for Human Rights and Development, or Forum Asia. Prior to that, she joined ASEAN Parliament for Human Rights as Program Manager, where she worked with Parliament to promote human rights issues. She had previously worked with the ASEAN Pacific Research and Resource Center for Women, or ARAW, to coordinate women's rights advocacy in Asia. For her many contribution in region, she has appointed as Frida Young Feminist Fund Advisor for 2010 until 2014, and a RAW board member since 2015 and up to now. So, good morning, Ms. Rahel.
Hello, Mbak Pipit. Hi, everyone. Shall I start?
Hi, it's nice to see you in this forum.
I know.
Okay. We wait for your speech, yeah?
Thank you.
Okay, and the second speaker, Gina Rose Balanlai, is a founding member and treasurer of the nationwide organization of visually impaired empowered, or NOVEL, a founding member of the Philippine Alliance of Women with Disabilities, and also a member of Philippine Coalition on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Gina also volunteer peer monitor of the Commission on Human Rights, Gender Equality, Women Human Rights Center, and she's also monitoring and evaluation consultant of Center for Advocacy, Learning and Livelihood, or CALL Foundation. Recently, Gina also alumni of CRAI in India. This is Disability Sexuality Rights Online Institute, and also alumni of Mobility International USA, International Women Institute on Leadership and Disability Program in the USA. And the third speaker is Emily Alamai Pradik, the founder and director of Manusha Foundation. Manusha is founded in 2017. Manusha means human being in Sanskrit, with the goal to empower local communities, in particular women human rights defenders, so they can fight for their rights, equality, and social justice. She is an international human rights lawyer, specialized in access to justice for marginalized communities. And prior to Manusha, Emily was the regional director of UPR Info Asia and served as human rights and advocacy officer with the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP. She also worked for Transparency International in Thailand and the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Paris. So Emily holds a Master of Law in Public International Law and postgraduate law degree in International Administration and Human Rights from the Sorbonne Law School, University Paris in France. And the last but not least, Josephine Chitra, a Senior Manager Public Affairs at Gojek. In the capacity, she served as primary lead for Gojek Public Affairs Research and Advocacy on social impact. She also leads engagement on issues related to environmental impact, as well as women's safety, gender equality, and welfare. Josephine earned her master's degree in development management from the London School of Economic and Political Science. Okay, that's all, Bang Tohas, our four bright speakers.
Thank you very much, Marana. I think all of us already listened to the short bio of all our distinguished speakers for today. I'm sure that we can wait for their presentation. And please do ask if you have any question to the speakers. Please write your question in the chat box, and later on, after all speakers complete their presentation, then we will go to the next session, which is the Q&A session, and all of you are welcome to raise your question to all our speakers for today. Without further ado, I would like to ask to give the microphone to my friends, Miss Rachel. Time is yours.
Thank you so much, Bang Tohas. I will start sharing my screen. So good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I have tendency to speak very fast. So hopefully I will do my best to keep it on pace. I would like to say thank you so much for EFES and also colleagues here who has been requesting my presence as part of the panel, and happy Women's Month. I think it's a very interesting time for all of us. My name is Rachel. I'm part of Forum Asia. So we are a regional network of 81 members organization across 21 Asian countries. And since the creations of Forum Asia in 1991, we work to strengthen movement for human rights and sustainable development through research, advocacy, capacity development, and solidarity actions. Since early 2000, at that time, Bayu Yun is also part of Forum Asia. We had a dedicated program on ASEAN advocacy. So for more than 20 years, we've been working on utilizing ASEAN platform for doing advocacy to better protect human rights. And for the content of the presentations, I will share some of the result of our documentations on how COVID-19 not only impacting women, but also human rights in the regions, and also the ASEAN human rights mechanism that we already have, and some of the best practices, lesson learned, and challenges. So last year we did a rapid assessment for the civil society organizations to see the effectiveness of ASEAN response for COVID-19. And 81% of the survey respondents disagreed that ASEAN have successfully protected the right of people during the pandemic because of the gravity of the impact to our daily lives. From the survey, we also find the 5 rights which perceived to be most deteriorated during the pandemic. First is the freedom of expressions, and this includes harassments to women journalists and also closure of some independent media, freedom of assembly associations, human rights defenders that receive harassment, and this also includes women's human rights defenders, and some of them are women living with disability. We also see migrants and refugee rights deteriorated, including Rohingya group that are impacted by the Myanmar crisis and recently coup. There are also indigenous people's rights that perceived to be deteriorating, mostly because of the land grabbing. And another layer of this survey also consists of media documentations and case documentations that we did together with Civicus since last year. So 3 main impact of COVID-19 to human rights for our region are the digitalization of civic space, which is actually an opportune moment for us. Because we can do webinar like this and engage everyone, but there's also risks that coming up, such as the online sexual gender-based violence, doxing, cyber attacks, and also surveillance, which affecting our privacy rights. And as Excellency Yu Yun has mentioned, the pandemic also exacerbates the pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities of marginalized groups. We see how the pandemic impacting the daily wage earners, factory workers, informal sectors, even people living with disabilities, women and LGBT communities. And then we also see the violation of the rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assemblies that I've shared earlier. So moving on, women, including women living with disabilities, has additional burden of the COVID-19 impact, because we see the, quarantine, self-isolation and physical distancing affecting women's well-being, and also raise the case of sexual and gender-based violence, especially urban populations that are living in slums in Philippines, Cambodia, and Indonesia. We also see unemployment because women are getting the impact of unemployment more severe than our male counterpart, and then it's really affecting the garment and textile industries worker. We also face increased care work, especially during the lockdown, and in heterosexual relationship, women are likely to be the lower earner, which means their jobs are lower priority. And we also see that critical services and need of at-risk groups are sidelined. These affecting people living with HIV and inability of getting life support medicines. And as I mentioned, gender-based violence online and offline is also increasing. So in response to this, actually, as Mbak Yuyun also has mentioned, ASEAN has a human rights mechanism that we can exercise and utilize. We have IJAR, which is the overarching human rights bodies for the ASEAN, and also ACWC, which is Commission that protected rights of women and children. On these presentations, perhaps I will focus more on ACWC. And for your information, ACWC are established by the Socio-Cultural Community Blueprint and has 20 representatives from 10 ASEAN member states. So each of our countries will have representatives on women's rights and also children's rights. And throughout the pandemic, we actually, Forum Asia did a report to assess 10 years effectiveness of the commissions, because last year in 2020 was the 10 years anniversary of ACWC. So we saw that only 25% of the ACWC 2016 to 2020 work plan were implemented. There's also skewed distributions of work plan activities with heavy reliance to Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, which also can be good because representatives from Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand are more active compared to others. However, there are inactions on Rohingya crisis and harassment to human rights defenders, women rights defenders, and also a specific focus on girls. There's also lack of engagement in CEDAW and CRC reporting. However, the milestones include the declarations on the protection of children from all forms of online exploitation and abuse, and also the creation of the regional plan of actions against violence of women and children. So although there has been challenges in terms of funding availabilities and political will from the ASEAN member states, there has been some milestone that has been achieved. However, few things need to be done before making it accessible and effective for the regions. And also in terms of COVID-19 response itself, as Mayuyun mentions, ASEAN has the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. ACWC is being tasked to do some activities, and there's also a request to do assessment on gender for the recovery. So we hope that within our recovery framework, gender justice are being included as a foundation towards building a better and just society, because this is something that very important as a preconditions for the betterment of women's rights advocacy in the future. And actually other regional organizations such as the African Union and the Organization of the Americas has already done that, because in April 2020 they have they have opened a complaint mechanism for any women and also LGBTIQ refugees, migrants that right violated, and they documented that. And they make declarations on the protections of women's rights, which includes protection of women with disabilities rights in the recovery framework. So this is something that we can aim higher from ASEAN, because we know that it is an important foundation for our post-pandemic context. And in terms of best practices, I want to share two best practices that I've witnessed to advocate for women's rights. So Formatia is a human rights organization, but within our ASEAN advocacy, one of the output is to also increase gender justice in the ASEAN context. So when I saw the journey of the people with disabilities in passing the ASEAN the creation of the enabling master plan, I consider this as a best practices, because how the people with disabilities organizations and movement really make cross movement collaborations with human rights organizations, with women's organizations, with migrant organizations, and also working with across the sectors, not only the IJR and ACWC representatives, but also representative from Ministry of Social Welfare and other bodies within ASEAN. So this is something that we can take as a best practices. And on the joint advocacy for the creation of ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism and the Regional Plan of Actions on Elimination of Violence Against Women and Children, we can also see how the process of doing consultations in national level leverage to process in the regional level, because in 2009, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights are created. However, there are some groups, especially women's groups, that requested for ASEAN to also have specific commissions for women and children's rights, given the differences of needs and also approach that needs to be taken. So throughout the 1 year until 2010, where ACWC was created, there are a lot of dialogue in national and regional level, as well as working together with the medias, with different sectors, including a list of consultations with Ministry of Women's Empowerment, and also requesting counsel from academia to make the mechanism happen. So in 2010, we finally have ACWC. And then a few years after that, there has been, so Forum Asia did an annual performance evaluation of the ASEAN human rights mechanism. And there has been recommendations that we actually need a regional agreements and blueprint on how to address the violence against women and children, given the increase of cases. So because of that, there has been also a series of national and regional consultations. And we have also championed from within ACWC who make this possible, and it's created. However, talking more about this, there are some support on preconditions that are needed to advance women's rights. I don't think that what we've done in the region has been successful because there has been challenges that still impacting our lives. But to move forward, I think would be really good to assess 6 points of support and preconditions that can advance the women's rights advocacy in ASEAN. First is the meaningful engagement of women from various constituencies using non-binary approach. I think by saying that we want to meaningfully engage women, trans women and queer women, women living with disability, women from different ethnicity need to be taken into considerations when we are engaging with the ASEAN mechanism. Second precondition is cross-movement and sectoral collaborations. I think what has been worked very well for the past years is there are shared resources and transparency among civil society. So we never perceive resources as a competitions. I think we are always sharing to each other that we have this much resources for ASEAN advocacy, and we can collaborate together to fill the gap. And I think this is happening with IFAS and ADF, also Forum Asia and the Southeast Asia Women Caucus. So it is very important to keep it going. And sectoral collaboration as well. And the third precondition is convening and discussions. I know it's been a challenge during the pandemic time, but I think we need to give energy and resources to organize national and regional discussions to really inform people about the issues and also engage people to utilize ASEAN mechanism. And fourth precondition is evidence-based advocacy. So it is very hard to find a Global South analysis or a journal on ASEAN, especially its human rights issues. Forum Asia did annual performance report on ASEAN human rights mechanism, and I hope other organizations can also allocate resources and time to do more journal, more report that are documenting and analyzing human rights trends in our regions, and also being used to create advocacy strategy. And then the fourth precondition is knowledge sharing and mentorships on ASEAN advocacy. As I shared, it's difficult to find resources, references from Global South on ASEAN advocacy. And it's even more difficult to find knowledge sharing and mentorship program from Global South Organization on ASEAN advocacy. And ASEAN, which is a sub-regional organizations in the region is doing that and mentoring young women from the ethnic groups to understand about ASEAN advocacy and to be able to be leaders in the movement. So I think we need to start doing that and focusing more on that. And I think like a year before the passing of the enabling master plan, IFAS and also ADF did a few of knowledge sharing on ASEAN advocacy, and that's really effective. So hopefully, although currently we are living in a pandemic situations, we can convert our traditional modality of doing knowledge sharing to online and keep the momentums going. And last precondition is actually on protection of women human rights defenders. It is very difficult to have a meaningful engagement of women if there is no protections mechanism of the women human rights defenders that are constantly receiving intimidations and harassment from state and non-state actors. So development of a national and regional protections mechanism is something that we can focus on in the upcoming years, and to making sure that these protection mechanisms are catering the needs of people living with disability as well, so that because one size doesn't fit all, so we need to also be prepared to create protections mechanism for diverse background of women human rights defenders. And while we are strengthening the protections mechanism, we have to be also providing holistic security training that are enable women human rights defenders to understand about physical security, psychosocial well-being, as well as digital securities. Because due to the shift of our world to be more digitalized, there are new and nuanced risks that we need to prepare in addressing. So I think that's basically all of my reflections. I have a slide on challenges, but I'm sure the challenges part will be tackled by other speakers, and I'm really happy to be able to share some of the analysis here. So thank you. And with that, I would like to give the floor back to Bang Tohas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rachel Arini Jasistari, for the thorough and very comprehensive and also thoughtful presentation. Started with giving us information on several challenges to the life of women and women with disability during COVID-19, and also Ms. Rachel expressed her reflection on how the ASEAN and ASEAN human rights mechanism has been taking place on addressing those kind of challenges to the protection and promotion of the right of women, girls, women with disability, as well as the 6-point precondition. I think this is something that really interested as takeaways from this discussion as well. So later on, I think we can go to it into deeply, because I think yeah, as we move forward on this unprecedented situation, I think this is the good practices and also recommendation can be used for our journey, our next journey. Okay, so let's move to the second speakers. The second speaker is Ms. Gina Rose Balenlai. She will speak about the participation and leadership of women, especially women with disability, on tackling several challenges as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Gina to take this floor. Go ahead, Ms. Gina.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Gina.
Okay, thank you. Magandang araw. Good day, fellow citizens in the ASEAN community, especially the women change movers. I am honored and thankful for this opportunity to share with you today how Filipino women with disabilities meaningfully participated in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 on the lives of our fellow women with disabilities. My presentation is based on the report of our NHRI, or National Human Rights Institute, Commission on Human Rights, Gender Equality, Women's Human Rights Center, or CHR-GEWHRC. As a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, our country, Philippines, went through a series of quarantines and lockdowns. Specifically, this covered the following periods. March 8, the celebration of Women International Day, our President Duterte declared a state of public health emergency throughout the Philippines. March 11 of last year, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. March 12, President Duterte announced general community quarantine over Metro Manila for March 15 to April 14. March 16, our President declared enhanced community quarantine, or ECQ, and expanded the coverage to entire Luzon Island effective 17 of March to 12 April 2020. So the declaration required the local government units to provide the basic needs of the Filipino people. So in this period, the first wave of the monitoring started, so from March 17 to April 17. In May 1, President Duterte placed 9 high-risk areas like Metro Manila under ECQ, or Enhanced Community Quarantine, while all other areas shift to General Community Quarantine for 2 weeks. So this period was the start of the second wave of the peer monitoring, May 1 to June 30. May 12, President Duterte approved the Interagency Task Force recommendations to place the high-risk areas like Manila under modified enhanced community quarantine starting May 15, while moderate risk areas remained under general community quarantine, but of course with minimum health standards were required. On May 28, President Duterte declared Metro Manila under general community quarantine starting June 1. And on June 16, Metro Manila GCQ was extended until June 30. Next slide. So the government's specific response to the needs of persons with disabilities. On March 18, 2020, I received an email from our National Human Rights Institute, Commission on Human Rights, Economic, Social, Cultural Rights Center, asking me the situation of persons with disabilities while we were under ECQ, or Enhanced Community Quarantine. So to provide them an evidence-based response, I initiated a survey to my network through my Facebook Messenger, which surprisingly reached to CHR GEWHRC, or Gender Equality Women's Human Rights Center's Gender Ombud. She told me that the center was also preparing for a meetup for the peer monitoring project, and she invited me to be part of the group. She told me, why not we work together? Of course, I accepted the invitation to be one of the peer monitors and even invited two of my colleagues. So at that time, I sent report to GAWHRC for women and to ASCR or Economic, Social, Cultural Rights Center on persons with disabilities on a weekly basis. My first report for 15 to May 21, my first report for 15 to March 21 to ESCR's center head was an earmark to communicate requests to the Department of Interior and local government to address the specific needs of persons with disabilities. So, in response to CHR, on March 31, 2020, DILG issued Memorandum Circular number 066 series of 2020 guidelines on providing proper welfare of persons with disabilities during the enhanced community quarantine due to COVID-19 pandemic. The instructions include all provincial governors to require their city and municipal mayors to include persons with disabilities in their list of beneficiaries in the distribution of food packs during the quarantine period, indicating the type of disability, the kind of food items received, including medicine and vitamins. Next slide, please. So, the community-based peer monitoring of access to service of women with disabilities during COVID-19 pandemic. This is a project of CHR, GEWHRC, and United Nations Population Fund or UNFPA Philippines. This project was conducted from March 17, 2020 to June 30, 2020. There were 13 peer monitors. GWHRC tapped the women taking action on their reproductive and sexual health or WDARE, and of course, my organization, the Nationwide Organization of Visually Impaired Empowered Ladies or NOVEL, to conduct the monitoring to our fellow women with disabilities. This project recognizes the following. First, the importance of working with organizations of persons or women with disabilities in planning and responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Second, the capacity of each woman with disability to reach out to their peers, to identify and document issues among their sector, and to forward key recommendations and areas for action. Third, that an important part of the empowerment of women with disabilities is to be able to understand the problems and barriers faced by their community, by their peers, and be a part of documentation of these issues and of seeking accountability. The role of the Commission or GWHRC through is to support women with disabilities in this process, to facilitate and to guide the documentation process, to document and to forward key recommendations for urgent and continuing action. Next slide, please. Methodology. First, selection of peer monitors was based on their organizational affiliation, involvement in disability rights, advocacy, and previous monitoring or documentation experienced. Most of them have participated in the national inquiry on the sexual reproductive health of women with disabilities held by the Commission on Human Rights, and also participated in various trainings conducted by CHR, GWHRC, and UNFPA. Second, actual conduct of peer monitoring. GWHRC developed 2 separate monitoring tools and disseminated them to peer monitors. The first round of the peer monitoring was focused on the following concern. If women with disabilities in the community received support services from the government and other organizations, health services needed, and if they were able to access health services. Other issues encountered by women with disabilities in accessing support services during the ACQ. The second round of the peer monitoring covered the following areas. If women with disabilities can access to support services such as food packs, medicine, social amelioration program. Impact of the quarantine to the lives of women and girls with disabilities. If they can access to sexual and reproductive health services of women with disabilities. And if they experience gender-based violence during the community quarantine. A coordinator per monitoring area was tasked to coordinate peer monitors and collect and consolidate weekly monitoring reports. Next slide. Okay, so challenges and limitations. Because of the restrictions on travel and movement during the quarantines and lockdowns, the project was not able to conduct face-to-face training with the peer monitors. Peer monitors were oriented through Facebook Messenger on the tool and interviewing skills. The data gathering methodology heavily reliant on mobile phones, data, and call and texting. So the other limitations include issues with connectivity, weak or erratic signal, and no load, dropouts among interviewees, and access to gadgets. Also, the lack of face-to-face, physical, on-site interaction, and survey fatigue could also lead to interviewees dropping out of the monitoring interaction altogether. Next slide. Results and findings. We have results. First is the perceived negative effects, and there's also a perceived positive effects. So for the perceived negative effects, first, inadequate distribution, delivery of relief goods. In the first week, only few of the interviewees have received relief goods to support them during the ECQ. The interview results have also revealed the unequal distribution of relief goods in some barangays and cities or municipalities. Next is concern for health needs, particularly those with who are women or senior citizens. Some interviewees need for ample food supply, immune booster, vitamins, and over-the-counter medicines for their health maintenance, especially for those who are hypertensive and diabetic. Next is the lack of access to information. There are groups of women and girls with disabilities who have faced challenges in accessing information on services and other guidelines related to the community quarantine. Deaf women, specifically said that they do not know where to obtain barangay quarantine passes, how to avail social amelioration program, and interagency task force guidelines. There are no sign language interpreters in their barangay or village, so they can clearly understand and even communicate the requests and be informed of the updates in their area. Next is transportation and mobility issues. During the enhanced community quarantine, the unavailability of public transportation and limited movement within the community have kept women and girls with disabilities from accessing health services such as checkups, therapies, and treatment. It also kept them from visiting or being visited by their healthcare providers. So let's now come to the next effect. So the effect on mental and psychosocial health. Two interviewees have signified that they are experiencing depression. Most of the interviewees have also expressed their worries brought upon by the threat of COVID-19 pandemic that they may infect their family and members as well as their neighbors. Another common trigger of their stress and anxiety is the financial crisis as a result of being out of work due to offices shutting down its operations. Next is discrimination against women and girls with disabilities. A woman with disability suffering from colds, fever, and urinary tract infection was asked to leave the facility or health center premises, forcing her to avail all medical services at a private facility. Next is women with disabilities as parent and caregivers. Some interviewees were anxious with regard to their children during the pandemic. Some have fear and worry that their children will not be able to go to school due to loss of income. Okay. So, on the other hand, there were positive effects or perceived improvement of their situation amid the pandemic, lockdowns, and quarantines. First is local government support. During the pandemic, support from the government comes in various forms, such as the social amelioration program, the local government unit financial assistance and relief packs, social security system financial support, and maintenance medicines, checkups, or assistance to constituents such as providing the use of ambulance to bring to the hospitals. Next is availability of family planning and reproductive health commodities during the lockdowns and quarantines. There are some interviewers who shared and acknowledged using condoms, IUD, injectables, pills, calendar method, and ligation. Next is gender-based violence during the quarantine. Majority of the women with disabilities interviewers had not heard any stories of violence against women with disabilities. And lastly, understanding the new normal. Women with disabilities perceive the new normal to be, first, abiding by and ensuring that health protocols are strictly followed, such as wearing of masks, face shields, washing of hands, sanitizing with alcohol, practice of social distancing, and other health protocols as that the government will be implementing and consciousness about keeping oneself healthy as well as the family. So this would be all. Thank you so much, Agenda and IFES. Happy Women's Month, everyone.
Thank you very much, Miss Gina. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I have a difficulties on technical problem now. Okay, so thank you very much, Gina, for a very encouraging presentation. Ms. Gina already gave us information on several important challenges facing by women with disability during the community quarantine measure. I think it is also reflect on the situation on I think all countries in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia also experience the same situation where the responses sometimes not really cover the basic need of all people, including women with disability. And what is the important thing here, we can see the role or the involvement of Miss Gina in advocating the fulfillment, the promotion of the right of person with disability, including women with disability during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure that her involvement we cannot say that her involvement can solve all problems, but from her small steps, I can imagine if there is no person with disability involved in the monitoring process, I think it is difficult to expect that people aware of the specific need of women with disability during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the example on how the leadership and participation of individual, like what Ms. Gina already explained to us, is also matter in this time of difficult situation. Okay, thank you very much again for Ms. Gina. So let's move to the third speaker for today. We have here Ms. Emily Pradeshit. She's the founder and director of Malaysia Foundation Thailand. She will present the participation and leadership of women in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, especially in a marginalized group in Thailand. So welcome and sawadika, Miss Emily. The time is yours now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to IFES and to the organizers for inviting me to be able to join this very important webinar this morning. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. Of course, I'm very happy to be able to share with you our work, but also challenges and solutions on how we can better support women from marginalized communities mitigating the impact of COVID-19. So first, I would like to talk to you a little bit more about Manushya Foundation. So Manushya Foundation is a women-led feminist human rights organization. We are located in Bangkok and we work mainly in Thailand and Laos, but since the COVID-19 outbreak, we mainly work in Thailand. And our focus is really to provide all the necessary tools and enables local communities, especially women human rights defenders, to be at the center of human rights responses that concern them. And for that, we have different strategies from capacity building to sub-granting to coalition building and advocacy and research. It's very important for us to build intersectional human rights coalitions or build intersectional advocacy coalitions that would comprise women from very diverse groups of society to speak with one strong voice. So it's really important for us to build coalitions of women, including indigenous women, women living with disabilities, migrant women, farmers, peasants, women who are also victims of domestic violence, informal workers, for them to be able to all advocate together with one strong voice on one same goal, which is to advance human rights. And most of our work evolved around specific thematic issues, which are in response to the most challenging human rights issues in the region, but also based on what the community members were working with need. So we work mainly on business and human rights to make sure that governments put people over profit, not profit over people. We work obviously on women's empowerment to ensure that women can lead human rights responses, can be at the center of movements, and that solutions and policies are women-led and take into account the important voice and point of view of women. We also work on access to UN human rights mechanism. So the previous speakers have talked a lot about leveraging ASEAN mechanism. We at Manushya, we leverage international human rights mechanism, and we want to make sure that the world knows what's happening in Thailand or what's happening in Laos through the UPR process, CEDAW reviews, and different treaty body reviews, like the third review coming up also in Thailand. And we also work on digital rights. And as Rachel has explained earlier, since COVID-19, we are moving more and more into the digital space, and there are new challenges that marginalized women are facing when it comes to the digital space. Not only there is a digital divide between women from urban places and women from rural communities who might not necessarily access digital space easily, but there's also all the issues related to cyberbullying and online sexual harassment against women. So these are the thematic areas that Manushya focused mainly on. And since
Emily, could you speak a little bit slower to allow our captionist and the sign language interpreter to follow your sentences? Thank you.
Okay, do you hear me? I was muted.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, okay, perfect. So when it comes to the COVID-19 response, I think it's important that I give you the context in Thailand. So as you know, the COVID-19 outbreak touched most of the ASEAN countries around March, end of 2019, and most of the ASEAN countries, and in particular Thailand, announced the lockdown of the country in March 2020. So since March 2020, in Thailand, we are under what we call the COVID-19 emergency decree. And it has been extended every month. Until now, we are still under the COVID-19 emergency decree. While the COVID-19 emergency decree has been enacted in response to COVID-19 to make sure that there's no spread of COVID-19 across the country, the implementation of the decree has been negative when it comes to marginalized communities, and it has been weaponized by the Thai government to crack down on activists, human rights activists, dissenting voices, including women human rights defenders, as well as women from marginalized communities. And I will give you examples throughout my presentation. What we also noticed since the COVID-19 outbreak was the lack of support from the Thai government to marginalized groups, and in particular, marginalized women. While the Thai government put in place a relief package, which would provide 5,000 baht per month to the most marginalized and the poorest communities and individuals in Thailand, that coverage would also be provided to people who are supported by the Social Security Fund, which means that indigenous women who do not have citizenship, migrant women who are not covered by the Social Security Fund, informal workers, domestic workers who are also not covered by the Social Security Fund, and sex workers were not able to access this relief package. So they were being left behind without any financial support during the lockdown. In addition to that, I'm just checking the presentation. Yes, so here you can see some of the women that we're working with that have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 because they did not receive the necessary support from the Thai government. And on top of not being able to receive financial support, from the Thai government, they have also been targeted and criminalized because of the advocacy work. So can you please put the next slide? So as I was explaining, the COVID-19 emergency decree that has been enacted in Thailand and that is being extended every month has been misused, has been weaponized by the Thai government to crack down on pro-democracy activists. As you know, since July 2020 in Thailand, there has been pro-democracy protest and pro-democracy movement growing across the country to call for constitutional reforms, also monarchy reforms. And one of the root cause of the protest back in July 2020 was the mismanagement of COVID-19 by the Thai government. The mismanagement in the way that there was an economic fallout with a clear decline of the GDP by 8% by 2021. And as I explained, the ineffective relief package not covering the most marginalized communities in the country, indigenous people, migrant workers, informal workers, sex workers, and with over 10 million people at risk of losing their job. So one of the root cause of young people and other going to the streets and joining the pro-democracy movement was to call for constitutional reform, but also because of the COVID-19 mismanagement by the government. And a lot of young people, including a lot of young women, are at the center of this pro-democracy movement, and they are assembling and gathering. But the emergency decree is being misused and weaponized by the Thai government to arrest, to charge democracy activists. So a lot of democracy activists, including young women, including transgender women, including sex workers activists, are being charged because they are joining the protest, because they are taking the floor at the protest to simply share the challenges they are facing on a daily basis. The picture that you're seeing is the picture of Rung. She's now in jail and she has several charges against her, including lèse-majesté charges and also charges of violating the COVID-19 emergency decree because she joined the pro-democracy protest and she led the pro-democracy protest. We also have our board member who is a sex worker activist that has been charged for violating the COVID-19 emergency decree just because he took the floor during the pro-democracy protest in Chiang Mai to share the realities of sex workers and the negative economic impact since COVID-19. We also have our young transgender woman friend, Panan, who has also been charged for violating the COVID-19 emergency decree, again, because she joined the pro-democracy protest in Chiang Mai and she basically spoke about the realities faced by the LGBT community, especially young transgender women in Thailand. So basically speaking truth to power or sharing your realities, the realities that you're facing since the COVID-19 pandemic, sharing your disagreement with the government policies and action can take you to jail and you can be charged. And the government is using the COVID-19 emergency decree to charge and arrest young women and pro-democracy activists. Another impact that we were able to notice in Thailand was the increased number of domestic violence cases. As reported by UN Women, there is an increase of 34% of reported cases since the outbreak of COVID-19. And it's very challenging in Thailand for the government to be able to respond to all those increased cases. Why? Is because domestic violence is normalized in Thai society. Domestic violence is being normalized, and most of the people in Thai society do not realize that domestic violence is a crime. And it's very challenging when you are a migrant woman, because the one-stop service for all, which is a service provided by the Thai government, which includes also a hotline service, it's only available for Thai women or for any woman speaking Thai. So if you are a migrant woman from neighbor countries, from Burma or from Laos, or from Cambodia, and if you don't speak Thai, you won't be able to access that support. You won't be able to access the hotline of the one-stop service support for survivors of domestic violence. So migrant women are being left behind, and they are the ones who are among the the most hit by the increased reported cases of domestic violence. Can you please put the next slide? So how do we respond to the inequalities and the exacerbation of inequalities since the COVID-19 pandemic? What we have been trying to do at Manushaya Foundation, we have been trying to work offline and online, because it was very challenging for us to travel, since there were COVID-19 restrictions throughout the country, and we were not able to travel almost all the year of 2020. The only thing that we could do was really to raise awareness about issues and to target the groups that they need the most support at that time. So what we did is that we supported the creation of the Women Workers for Justice group, which is located in Chiang Mai, and which has been founded by one of our board members, Sukanta Sukpeta, who is a labor rights activist and who has been working with migrant women for many, many years. And so she has created this group in order to build the capacity of Burmese migrant women to know about their rights, and also for them to be able to receive knowledge on anti-COVID practices that they can share back with the communities. We were also able to channel food and clothes through that network to migrant workers and their families. We were also able to support the delivery of Know Your Rights training for them to be able to know their rights, because what happened in Thailand, a lot of migrant workers were not able to return to their home countries. So they were stuck in Thailand while they didn't receive any financial support, because many of them lost their jobs. So they were left behind with no jobs, not able to go back home. And it was really important for us to be able to support the creation of the Women Workers for Justice groups, to provide migrant women with mental health support, clothes, food, and the basic Know Your Rights training in case they are being stopped by the police, in case they are being controlled by the police, to make sure that they are not being manipulated and unfairly pushed into in the situation that they don't want to. Can you please show the next slide? So here's the picture of the founder of the Migrant Workers for Justice group, Sukanta Sukpeta, and some pictures of the activities that she was able to provide during the lockdown in Chiang Mai throughout the year 2020. So some Know Your Rights training, some focus group discussion, but really bringing women migrant workers together to build solidarity, because it was really, really important to build solidarity, because many of them had increased mental health impact. And those who were victims also of domestic violence really needed a support system, because they might have not experienced physical violence, but many of them experienced emotional violence. And it's a very taboo subject when it comes to emotional violence, when it comes to mental health impact. Nobody really wants to talk about it, and nobody really wants to acknowledge it when it comes to seeking justice in Thailand. If you try to report a case at the police station, unless the police officers see bruises on you, they're not going to take you seriously. They truly do not consider domestic violence and emotional violence as a crime. They think it is a family issue and a private matter. And the next slide is going to show you the perfect example of what happened during, the next slide is also, so we were also able to provide organic soaps to 250 families during the lockdown by partnering with the Bangkok Soap Opera. So we try to find partners to use the corporate social responsibility values for them to give us free organic soap, so then we could send them to indigenous families, to migrant workers families, because when you work with indigenous people and migrant workers, they are not going to the money they have, the little money they have to survive, they're going to buy rice, they're going to buy food. They're not necessarily going to buy the necessary gel or soap to protect themselves from the transmission of COVID, to make sure that they can wash their hands on a daily basis. So it was important for us to provide them with organic soap so that we were sure that they could wash their clothes using organic soaps. They could wash their hands as much as they could, rather than keeping the money so that they could keep the little funds that they had to buy food. So the next slide is specific to the domestic violence case I wanted to share with you. So what we did also, everything that I presented to you earlier was what we were able to do offline. But since we are experiencing the impact of COVID-19, most of our work has moved online. And so it became really important for us to be able to denounce what is happening in Thailand. It was important for us to be able to amplify the voices of women human rights defenders we are working with in the online space. So I would say that since the COVID-19 outbreak, we have increased our presence online, and we have increased our online campaigns to be able to support women human rights defenders, have a platform to be heard, and also to be able to tell the world what is happening in Thailand for them. Can you please put the next slide? So we were able to, by monitoring the human rights situation in Thailand on a daily basis, we have been reporting on a daily basis on our social media, on our Twitter, on our Instagram, on our Facebook, because we have also started increasing engagement with young people. We have been able to denounce the government crackdown on women human rights defenders, especially young women protesters, as you can see in these pictures. All of them have been charged. And one of them is in prison. Rung is in prison, while the others are waiting. But they all have been charged for lèse-majesté, for sedition, and for violating the COVID-19 emergency decree. The next slide, please. So this is the domestic violence case I wanted to share with you. Since there has been an increased number of reported cases of domestic violence, people working in the human rights field and people working on women's rights would know about it. But the public at large, we would all know that there was an increase of domestic violence cases in Thailand, but there was a particular case that actually shocked the whole country. It's the matricide case at Bang Phrom in the northern part of Thailand. And this is the perfect case of the Thai government and the Thai authorities totally overlooking the importance of domestic violence and treating domestic violence as a family issue, as a private matter, rather than a crime. So we decided to leverage on that terrible case of a mother that has been killed by her son, who had mental health issues, in order to start raising awareness on the domestic violence in Thailand. And we launched that campaign last month in March, really to start in Thai and in English, really to start raising awareness on domestic violence and to kick off the discussion online, because the women we are working with, especially indigenous women, are also experiencing domestic violence because they are evolving in a very patriarchal system and society. So they are living the struggle within the struggle. They are indigenous, and on top of that, they are women. And the matricide case in Bang Phrom is also a case related to an indigenous family. In this particular case, the mother and the neighbors and the family members went to report the son to the police many, many times. But the police never wanted to take the complaint. The police always said, this is a family matter. It does not concern us. And also, when we are supporting women going through the justice system in Thailand, trying to report the domestic violence case, this is also what we experience. Police officers laughing at us, telling us, you're coming too late. You should come the day you're being beaten. Why are you coming only now? What mental health issues are you talking about? So the invisible wounds, the invisible bruises that women experience as a result of emotional violence is totally overlooked by Thai authorities. And we will never be able to get support by the police and by the justice system because domestic violence is being normalized. So now more than ever, especially since the increase of reported cases of domestic violence in Thailand, there's a real need to denormalize domestic violence and really to make it clear that this is a crime. And domestic violence is not only physical violence, it's also emotional violence. And the fact that police authorities are overlooking or laughing at the face of women going to report domestic violence cases is very problematic. The fact that Thai soap operas and Thai TV shows still normalize domestic violence or rape scenes in the shows is very problematic. So there's a real need to denounce that, and there's a real need to treat domestic violence as a crime and no longer as a family matter. The next slide, please. So how we have also been able to raise awareness about what is happening in Thailand and the impact of COVID-19 on marginalized women in Thailand is by conducting community-led research to inform international human rights mechanism. So this year, Thailand will go through its third Universal Periodic Review in November 2010, but also through the third review, its review in relation to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And so it was really, really important for us that women from marginalized groups, women from ethnic minorities, indigenous women, refugees, migrant women, but also women who are peasants and villagers from forest-dependent communities in the Isan region, which is the poorest region of Thailand, and who is also facing a lot of racial discrimination because they speak the Lao language. It was really important for us that these women take part in those reviews, that also sex workers take part in these reviews, that also women belonging from the LGBT community, transgender women, lesbians, intersex person can also take part in those reviews. And so we conducted workshops, physical workshops at the end of 2020, once we were finally able to travel throughout the country to be able to gather the information from community voices so that they can engage in the third and upcoming UPR review this year, simply to tell the world what's happening in Thailand and to fight racism. And we will also amplify the voices through online campaigning, digital campaigning, videos, also to inform the public about the realities faced by these women. And a lot of people come to Thailand thinking that this is a great destination for tourism. And many people do not realize the realities faced by many Thai women, especially women from marginalized communities. When you live in Bangkok, you live in a bubble. You need to go outside of the city. You need to go to rural areas to be able to see the real Thailand, to be able to see the reality faced by marginalized women in Thailand. As you may know, Thailand has been considered one of the most unequal countries in the world back in 2008 by the Dutch Bank. And the recent study also put Thailand number 4 when it came to one of the most unequal countries in the world. So there's a real wealth gap between people living in Bangkok and the rest of the country, noting that 1% of the population in Thailand detain the wealth of the country. So it says a lot. It says that 99% of the country cannot benefit from the wealth of Thailand. The way that the fiscal budget is being divided in the country is really unequal. You have 80% of the fiscal budget targeting or allocated to Bangkok, which is already a rich city, and you would only have 6% of the fiscal budget allocated to the northeastern region of Thailand, Isan, which is the largest and poorest region in the country. And one of the racial discrimination, but also inequalities that Isan people are facing is also in relation to the ownership of land. So can you please show the next slide, please? So for example, the case of Nitaya, she's a woman human rights defender who is also a land rights defender from Isan, the region I was just talking about earlier, the largest region of Thailand, but also the poorest region of Thailand, because the government does not invest in people of Isan. There's low education system. There's no job opportunities. Most of the Isan people are coming to Bangkok to find a job. And because they are facing racial discrimination, they are performing jobs that people in Bangkok don't want to do. They are the maids, they are the cleaning ladies, they are the informal workers, they are the taxi drivers, they are the food street vendors, they are the sex workers. And for those who stay in Isan, they are mainly farming, they are farmers. And Nitaya is one of them. She's a woman human rights defender who has stood up for her community to protect her land. And she's a victim of Thailand Forced Climate Solution, which is the severe implementation of Thailand forest reclamation policy and Thailand forest conservation policies in order to reclaim forest areas, in order to prove to the World Bank and to the world that Thailand is mitigating climate change. But the way that Thailand is mitigating climate change, instead of targeting businesses, instead of targeting investors, capitalist investors who are destroying the forest, who are destroying the environment and polluting the air, the Thai government is going after poor farmers and villagers who own a small part of land. They're going after indigenous people, evicting them from the land. They are considering people who are actually protectors of the forest dependent communities and indigenous communities are protectors of the forest. Where they have been living for generations is where the forest has always been protected. There has not been deforestation where indigenous people and forest dependent communities are living. So we don't understand why the Thai government is reclaiming land from indigenous people and from those forest dependent communities instead of going after businesses. So Nitaya is a victim of the forest reclamation policy of Thailand. She's part of the 14 subway villagers who have been unfairly criminalized under Thailand Forced Climate Solutions. And they have all been to jail in 2019, and we have been supporting them through international litigation for them to be able to share the story and for the world to know what is happening to them. And so the case of Nitaya is a very important case because this is the first time that villagers are challenging Thailand's forest reclamation policy at the court level, at the Supreme Court level. And they all went to jail in 2019 because the appeal courts found them guilty of trespassing forest land and of destroying the forest. We were able to support them through international litigation by sending information to UN special rapporteurs, sending a UN complaint to them, and UN special rapporteurs then sent a communication to the Thai government in August 2019, asking the Thai government, why are these villagers criminalized? Why are they not considered poor people, protectors of the forest? Why are they considered investors, destroyers of the forest? As a result of that complaint and communication by the Thai government, the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment did a new investigation and then issued a new list to consider the subway villagers as poor villagers who should have not been evicted. But then COVID-19 came, and when COVID-19 came, the whole process of giving them justice was suspended. And it was difficult for us to be able to lobby the Supreme Court. It was difficult for us to lobby more with national governments on this case because of the COVID-19 restrictions. So what we did was to launch an online campaign for her case to show the Thai government and to show the Thai judiciary that her case is still ongoing and that we are still monitoring and still watching what's going on. So the Supreme Court hearing for Nitaya was on 3rd of March, earlier on this month. And in order for her not to go to jail, we launched an online petition to tell the world how the Thai government is treating, is negatively treating forest-dependent communities and indigenous people through its forced climate solutions. And so we launched the...
Emily, you still have 2 minutes to complete your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm almost done. And so we launched this campaign, and in one weekend we were able to get more than 300 signatures, and then we were able also to submit a letter to the Supreme Court And as the result of the online advocacy and amplifying the voice of Nitaya at the international level, she did not go to jail. So we were happy that the verdict didn't send her to jail, but she's still found guilty of destroying the forest. Yeah, can you please go directly to the last slide? So for us, what works when it comes to feminist responses to COVID-19, it's really adopting a feminist participatory approach by ensuring that marginalized women are the center of decision-making that concern them, by providing know your rights training, legal empowerment training online and offline, by undertaking digital campaigning to make sure that they are visible and heard, to amplify their voices, by undertaking community-led research to be able to share their realities with international human rights mechanism in order to tell the truth about what's happening in Thailand. And really, if you could just show the slide before, I would like to finish with the digital space. For us, the most challenging, it's how are we going to respond to women human rights defenders being impacted in the digital space. And so for that, we're holding a webinar tomorrow evening from 5 to 7 p.m. Bangkok time, where we're going to be looking at women human rights defenders in the digital space. And there will be women human rights defenders sharing their realities and their solutions to be able to speak truth to power freely. So if you're available, you can join us tomorrow, because we will also brainstorm on how we can tackle the harassment and online bullying faced by women human rights defenders online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emily, for the very encouraging and inspiring presentation. You gave us the example on how the participation of women on tackling the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the protection of human rights, also have different type of consequences and risks. So I think this is a good example of how we can support the women participation by enabling them as well to anticipate the risk and aware of the risk that can be come to them during their work. So thank you very much, Ms. Emily. I know that you want to share a lot of good experience from your work, but we have a limited time on that. So thank you very much. And let's continue to next speaker for today, Ms. Josephine Chitra. She's Senior Manager and Public Affairs from Gojek. She will cover the information with regards to the use of the digital technology to improve the economic life of women. This is also a part of how the private sector also can give the significant contribution to the improvement of the life of women, and how the private sector can take their role on ensuring that women and women with disability as well can be fully participate in the economic life during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Ms. Josephine, time is yours.
Thank you so much, Bang Solhas, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning to distinguished representative of IFES, of the Australian government, Her Excellency Bu Yuyun, and also distinguished speakers, Rachel, Gina, Emily. I'm also very inspired by all of your experiences in championing equality, gender equality, and also especially for women with disability during this very difficult time. So allow me to share my screen. Right, I hope everyone can see this. And yeah, I'll ask, okay. All right. So yeah, as Bang Chol has mentioned, my presentation today is going to be about how at Gojek we create economic opportunities for women with the use of digital technology. And thank you so much for having Gojek here as the representative of private sector. I think we have listened to great stories from Rachel, Gina, and also Emily, how CSO or NGO can play a huge and significant part for making sure that women are involved in the decision-making process, and also they're not left behind during the recovery post-pandemic. Today I'm going to give a perspective from the private sector, how we also create inclusive digital technology to help women entrepreneurs survive and also thrive during the pandemic. So allow me to briefly introduce about Gojek, especially for those who are not coming from the countries where we are present. So Gojek now operates across many cities in 4 Southeast Asian countries, which are Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and also Vietnam. And our app has been downloaded more than 190 million. So and another perspective, 190 million is already like more than half of Indonesia's population. And we also have more than 2 million driver partners and more than 900,000 GoFood partners, which were, most of them are the micro, small, medium enterprises. So when we talk about women entrepreneurs, obviously before pandemic, they play a huge part. So I read some stats from ASEAN countries in which in 2017 alone, there are more than 60 million women who own and operate business within the ASEAN countries. And in Indonesia, in 2018, 64.5% registered MSMEs in Indonesia are managed by women. And in 2019, the contribution of women managed micro, small, medium enterprises to Indonesia GDP reached more than 9%. And their contribution to export is also more than 5%. So the key message from this data is really how womenpreneurs play an important role in driving economic even before the pandemic. So now if we're talking about economic recovery later after the pandemic, we also have to support and empower women entrepreneurs because they play a huge pivotal role in economy. So zooming into Gojek ecosystem, at Gojek itself, we believe that women must have equal access to economic opportunities, and because they also make up of a significant amount in our ecosystem. So GoFood merchant partners, for example, GoFood is our food delivery services, and 42% of our GoFood merchant partners are women, in which 27% of them are housewives. Later on, I will tell a story how our technology can be also applicable for helping housewives to help them juggle between domestic responsibility and also work. And the second point is also about how 76% of women social sellers use GoSan, our logistics services, for their online store. So social sellers are the term for individuals who sell their items through social media or e-commerce. So they use GoSan to send their goods to their buyers. And 39% of our GoPay merchant partners are women. GoPay is our e-payment services. So we see that 250,000 of new merchants actually joined Gojek ecosystem during the pandemic. So when the pandemic struck, and unfortunately there were many people that probably got laid off, or probably they got their salary cut by their companies or their organizations, and we saw that there was a huge influx coming to our Gojek ecosystem when they become new entrepreneurs, and they become starting their own. For example, previously the cooking was only their hobby, but right now during the pandemic they try to sell their food. And again, 27% of these newly registered SMS partners are housewives who become GoFood MSME partner. Now we're talking about how Gojek is we empower micro, small, medium enterprises, not only female entrepreneur, but also in general. So we have a program called Go Forward with Gojek, or in Indonesian we call as Melaju Bersama Gojek. Essentially, it's a comprehensive and inclusive solution for MSME. So if we can see here the circle, I explained it as well. From the marketing and order processing, payment, delivery, administration. So we understand that when we talk about MSME and micro, small, medium enterprises, they usually are very self-reliant, and probably 1% can do everything in their role. So the same person probably cooks the meal or produce their items. At the same time, they are also the marketer. At the same time, they have to handle the order. They have to handle the payment. They have also to become the administrator. So they wear multiple hats in their business. So we want to make them life easier by providing this comprehensive solutions that can help them. For examples, in marketing, we have like GoFood and GoShop, where their products, either their food or either their non-food items, can be displayed and can be accessed by millions of our users here. And for example, on order processing, we also have the GoFood and GoShop, and also Sally. So Sally is our what we call as a magic keyboard, because essentially instead of the seller has to reply the buyer message one by one, they can have a template of answers to the frequently asked questions. So it saves up time for the sellers. And also the third point is on the payment. How we have also GoBiz, which is the merchant-facing platform. Think about like how this GoBiz is an app for the merchant where they where they process the order, when they also handle the payment, and also of course we have GoPay, our digital payment, and we also have other solutions such as Sally, Midtrans, and Mocha. And why in this payment we have several options of the payment services, because we also acknowledge that not all MSME are at the same level, and not all of them service the same type of consumers. So for example, for medium enterprises who already probably accept credit card payment, they can also use Midtrans services to accept the credit card payment. But probably for very micro, small businesses, they can just use GoPay, for example. And then the fourth area that we help is also on the delivery, because this is also our one of our strong core in business, where we have the hyperlocal delivery network through GoSend or GoBox for large items. And lastly is also about administration. So for the administration is really about how, for example, like transaction recap. We know that MSMEs are usually not that digital savvy, or they usually probably still take notes on paper about their transaction. And as a result, they cannot really have any kind of business analytics. They don't really know how how well their products or their menu are doing well. So through these apps, we also help them doing this kind of business intelligence and business analytics, so they can know, for example, what kind of menu of meals that they have to produce more, and at what time they usually the buyer usually order from them, so they can make a more evidence-based business decision making. And we also understand that technology alone is not enough to support the growth of MSMEs. So we also provide access to capital, to market, and obviously also to training programs. So for example, access to capital, we facilitate the entrepreneurs in our ecosystem with access to loan from various financial institutions, including we partner with state-owned banks. So there was one story from our GoFood merchant, Ibu Aziza, who got her loan during the pandemic from one of our state-owned bank, and she received up to 50 million rupiah. And it's very important here, we facilitate this kind of access to capital, because when we talk about MSMEs, sometimes they're also have hindrance and blocker to go to formal financial institution. Sometimes because again, they might not have the record of this business. Their business might be doing very well, but they might not have a very well documented transaction, for example. But using our technology, they can bring this proof of transaction to the banks and to convince the banks that their business might be their business are doing well, so they deserve to get the loan facilities from the banks. And the second is access to market. So not only we display their products through our technology, but we also make several promotion programs to boost purchasing power from our consumers. And we also partner with the Indonesian government in Bangga Buatan Indonesia program, or what we call in English as Proud of Indonesian Products. And lastly, we also partner with government in, for example, Toko Tani or farmer store, where is a state-owned farmer store where consumers also can get basic necessities such as like sugar, rice, oil with a relatively cheaper price. And lastly, at Gojek, we are a huge believer of capacity building programs. So we partner with various parties so we can reach more entrepreneurs. We give several like entrepreneurial training skills training, and then business management training, online marketing, and even we also give training like how to take good pictures for your business, or how to do social media strategy. That might sound basic for some of us, but actually that's something that very needed by our micro small business entrepreneurs who might not be as technologically literate as we are. So we have various programs like Gojek Wira Usaha or Gojek Entrepreneurs. We have the GoFood Partner Community. We have GoPay Good Seller Forum, and we also have Go Nusantara. But essentially, all these trainings aim to enhance the capacity of MSMEs so they can move up the ladder of their economic capacity right now. So for example, we hope that the micro merchant can move up to the small merchant can move up to the medium one, and also the medium one could move up to the more like large established enterprise. So we at Gojek not only keep doing what we do, but we also want to take a pause and reflect on how well or what kind of lessons learned that we can get from our past activities. So we partner with the UN Women and also Past Lab Jakarta last year to do a research on how women-owned micro and small businesses use technology to help them cope with the pandemic. And there are two main interesting findings here. The first one is apparently digital platforms such as Gobis are helping womenpreneurs adapt and expand their business. So it's not only they can survive during the pandemic with the help of this digital platform, but they also can thrive during this pandemic using this digital platform, because we know that during this pandemic, people mostly stay at home. They probably order food more often than before. So this opportunity was used by women entrepreneurs with the help of our technology. The second main interesting finding is about how digital solutions are enabling the business owner to better balance home and work responsibility without fully interrupting business operations. So the research found that 82% of women noted that Gobis, like digital solutions such as Gobis, Sally, Mocapos, can help them running their business. At the same time, they also help them taking care of their domestic and family responsibilities. So they have more extra time to spend with their family and take care of children. This is particularly relevant for our female GoFood merchant who own their businesses at their own house. Because we know that right now, students also have to study from home. They cannot go to school. So it actually adds more responsibility to the parents, especially women, who still play double, if not multiple roles in their life, not only as a wife, not only as a mother, but also someone who earns income. So one of the stories from our GoFood merchant, Bu Novita in Semarang, is how she can, when she helps her kid to study at home and to make sure that he attends the school and stuff, she would turn off the Gobis, so she will not receive the order from GoFood. But once she is done helping her son, she will turn on back again the app. So this kind of flexibility really allows our female merchants to take care of their children, but also they don't really interrupt their business operations. I encourage everyone to read further about this report, because there are so many findings from this report, and I'm sure it's very useful to understand better how we can increase the women participation in economic recovery during the pandemic. And yeah, I just want to tell one more story from our GoFood merchant, Ibu Ria or Mrs. Ria. So she's a mom with 2 children with special needs. So both of her son have nonverbal autism. And interestingly, she is also a wife of our Gojek driver partner. So this is like what we call usually a Gojek family, because in one family, the spouse either becomes the GoFood merchant or become Gojek drivers. But yeah, so the mom or Mrs. Ria is handling their food businesses, and they rely so much on online food delivery. And not only she experienced a benefit from using GoFood, but also she received a lot of benefit from Kompak. So Kompak is our GoFood partner community, because we do monthly training. So she received a lot of business tips and tricks, and now she also has 2 outlets of her business. And she also participated in various promotions on GoFood to attract customers. And lastly, what was very interesting for me is how she said that because she stays at home and her outlets are also at her house, she can observe attentively to her son. So for example, she found out that her older son has interest in culinary. So she helped, she gave her son the opportunity to help her in the kitchen. She taught her son to clean the food, how to cut the ingredients, how to serve, and how to package the food. And according to her, it led to significant progress in the son's development. And so she felt like she's not only becoming a businesswoman, but she said that she could also become a therapy for her son. And it is very good for her to finally see her son directly and can have a close attention to make sure that they are progressing in their development. Lastly, I would like to play a video. So this video is a brief summary of what Gojek did last year during the pandemic, not only to our entrepreneurs or not only to our merchants in our ecosystem, but also to our driver partners and also to a larger society outside of Gojek ecosystem. I hope that this video is in English, but there are some part of our testimony from our driver partners in Indonesia. So I hope the interpreter can also help interpreting the content of this video.
Miss Josephine, it seems that we don't have the voice yet.
Oh, sorry. Okay, wait. Wait, let me share my screen again. I think I should share computer sound. Sorry. I'll replay.
Helping to create impact for the greater good is part of our DNA. Thanks to all of you, millions of businesses and entrepreneurs throughout Indonesia are able to survive the pandemic. From their hearts to yours.
Hai, aku Nila dari Serikandi Merah Putih. Aku mengucapkan terima kasih untuk Gojek Indonesia atas kepeduliannya kepada kami mitra Gojek.
Saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada Gojek Indonesia.
Terima kasih PT Gojek Indonesia atas traktirannya untuk para mitra Gojek seluruh Indonesia.
Though many are impacted, most remain optimistic about the future. Thank you for supporting our partners and showing our spirit of Pasti Ada Jalan.
All right, thank you everyone. That was a brief of my presentation. I'm looking forward to our discussion. And lastly, happy International Month. I hope that the discussion of women's right protection and also women economic opportunity does not only end in this month. I hope that we can carry through the spirit of championing gender equality throughout the year. Thank you. And I'm going back to Bang Tolhas.
Thank you very much, Ms. Josephine Citra from Gojek, for your very inspiring and comprehensive presentation on how the use of the digital technology can also improve the life of women, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. I think we hope that there will be more and more private sector and companies will support women to improve their lives during the COVID-19 pandemic, because the role of the women and the role of the leadership of women is also important, at least in the domestic life as well as in the society. So thank you very much. I think we all the speakers already completed their presentation, I think, and this is the time for us just to have a very interesting discussion on this topic. And with further ado, I would like to call my friend Dela Lenor from ASEAN Disability Forum to guide us, to facilitate us on this Q&A session. So, Ms. Dela, go ahead.
Hello there, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy lunchtime. I hope you still have the energy to ask the questions. We have acquired substantial knowledge from our panelists. So at this moment, we are ready to take your questions. And I will not waste my time as of the moment. To those who would like to ask their questions, please unmute your microphone. And to those who would like to ask questions, just write down on the chat box. Okay. So the first question goes to Rachel and Ibu Yuyon. When it comes to advocating both gender sensitive and disability inclusive COVID-19 responses and recovery, it is quite a challenge to advocate the intersectionality of the issue with the ASEAN. Do you have any advice how women with disabilities organizations can better engage with ASEAN in terms of building sustainable, coordinated communication? So I would like to ask Ibu Yuyan first, and I would like to also ask the question to Rachel.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that's something that many people have also felt so far, that engaging with ASEAN, especially during the pandemic, is quite challenging. But I would like to encourage you to continue to knock the door. ADF and Agenda has a number of contact with the ASEAN Secretariat, which will be able to pave the way. You can also contact me if I can help. ICHR, ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, used to have annual meeting, annual forum in which different sectoral bodies can come together and talk, and that is the opportunity for many group of persons with disabilities to engage with different institutions in ASEAN. But due pandemic, we are rather constrained in doing it. But we are trying our best, because myself and also the representative of Thailand that is taking care of the issue of person with disabilities continue to have a series of dialogue. Also, together with ADF as well as with Agenda, ICHR Indonesia is going to organize series of webinar on looking at best practices, challenges, and ways forward in the implementation of the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, because all of the countries member of ASEAN ratified the convention, and we would like to know what are the challenges. So please join us in our series of discussion. We will start the webinar on the April 5th. So we will be able to again link you, or you can link to different speakers and also participants in the webinar for further collaboration.
Thank you so much, Ibo Yuyon. Miss Rachel, do you have something to say about this?
Yes, thank you, Della. Sorry that I have to turn off my video because it's raining heavily at my house. I'm afraid if I turn on my video, the internet connection is unstable. Thank you again for the questions. I think intersectionality is needed because in the COVID era, we saw how civic space are shrinking, both offline and also online, and therefore the trajectory is for us to collaborate more as human rights movement. On the technicalities for engaging, definitely increasing knowledge is the first path that we need to do together for organization because not many organizations are making a conscious options and commitment to engage with ASEAN. So definitely collaborations is needed to inform the mechanism of engaging with ASEAN. And as Mbak Yuyun mentioned, the situations of pandemic also affecting the implementations of discussions between ASEAN human rights mechanism and ASEAN overall with civil society organizations. However, in 2015, the concept of people centrality within ASEAN has been reintroduced. So we need to be mindful of it and also requesting the ASEAN leaders to respecting the principles. And definitely, there are some rooms for collaborations, not only through webinars, but we can have blended discussions in national level because of the prolonged travel restrictions, where we can strategize how we need to readjust our advocacy and engagement strategy with ASEAN this year and more. And I really encourage women living with disability groups to looking at the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework because it's going to be the blueprint for the future. And organizations like Forum Asia and others are really happy to work together with women living with disability networks. In addition, we will also have the largest Southeast Asia civil society convening this year, ASEAN People's Forum / ASEAN Civil Society Conference will be held in October online if the travel restriction persists. So typically we will have 3,000 civil society organizations come together to have discussions and strengthening our solidarities from different movements. So I really encourage you to also participate in the event. And I'm sure this year, because of COVID, everything will be happening online. So it provides more opportunities for everyone to engage with, although the interpretations and typeface is something that we can advocate together with the steering committee to incorporate it. Lastly, since last year, we've been requesting the ASEAN leaders to have an interface meeting between civil society and ASEAN leaders in the ASEAN summit. last time we had it is in 2019, where Thailand is become the chair. So hopefully in the October ASEAN summit, we are able to have this, dialogue between civil society and ASEAN leaders to discuss about the issues that are affecting communities in ASEAN. And I think that's the response that I want to share with you. For any further collaborations, I'm really happy to take it on beyond the webinar, and my email can be accessed in the PowerPoint presentations that will be circulated to the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That's a great input in that matter. This next question goes to Josephine of Gojek. How do Gojek ensures the inclusivity of their capacity building programs for all women, especially those who are in rural areas or with disabilities? Miss Josephine?
Thank you, Della, and also thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a very good question and also input, because at this point, right now we still focus on how we make sure the capacity building is inclusive for all gender, including for men and women. By making sure that there should be a representation of women in the training. But yeah, on the accessibility part, especially for those who live in rural areas with limited access of internet, for example, and for those who are with disability, we are still working on it. So that's definitely an input. But probably one of the, because most of Gojek services are located in urban cities, so we don't really go into rural areas for creating the capacity building. But for example, one of our subsidiary company called Mapan. So Mapan is a community-based saving and loan platform under Gojek Group. And their business model is how to create agents. So it's where they have a lot of agents, and including in rural areas. So for example, there is one of women. Her name is Lasmawati. So she is one of the inspiring Mapan agent from a small village in West Java, and with her help, she also sells. So she used our technology to sell phone credit in her small kiosk, and also she can access formal financial system. So not only she used our technology, but through the technology, she also mentors other women in her village to be financially literate and also gadget savvy. So for me, this is really an epitome of a saying that empowered women empower others. And so, yeah, to recap about how we reach out to rural areas with probably those who have limited internet connection, we also still have our human agent to also reach out and to also build capacity for those who are there. Because yeah, we also believe that technology is not a silver bullet for everything, for every problem. We also still should involve human intervention to make sure that our objective is achieved. I hope this answers.
Thank you very much, Miss Josephine. I have seen the participant list, and I think I have seen so many active disability rights groups and members here. I would like to encourage you to unmute your microphone if you have a question, or raise your hand. This is your opportunity to collaborate with our panelists right now. So I have a question here on the chat box. Hi, I'm Indy from Yapika Action Aid Indonesia. We understood the response to the Sunda Strait tsunami disaster in Pagdiglang, Banten district, and continued to strengthen community resilience, strengthen the protection and livelihood sector led by women. One of the impacts of the pandemic is an increase in child marriage, school dropouts, maternal mortality, and gender-based violence, especially cyber-based. How can the existing ASEAN coordination mechanisms collaborate or provide support in responding to the impacts above? I may ask Gina and Ibo Yuyon and other panelists who would like to react in this question.
What's
Ibo,
the
you
question again, please?
okay. So the question is, how do we strengthen the protection and livelihood sector led by women? Because it impacted the increase of child marriage, school dropouts, maternal mortality, and gender-based violence. How can an existing ASEAN coordination mechanism collaborate or provide support in responding to the impacts above?
Who's first?
Okay, Ibo Yuyan, can you?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the question. Child marriage particularly has been one of the priorities of social cultural community as an impact, one of the impact from the pandemic. Lately, there has been number of meetings of different institution and mechanism or sectoral bodies in ASEAN to discuss about preventing child marriage as the implication of pandemic COVID-19. So the role of ASEAN is to engage with member states to hasten their efforts to prevent this to be happen through a different means. So yeah, at the regional level, there has been number of discussion about this. I'm not sure what is tangible activities yet to address this problem, but yes, it has been ASEAN has been eyeing on this particular problem and dropout schools. I guess I lately also understand that number of efforts from the senior official meeting on education to start the physical schooling so that children can go to school in different ways post-pandemic, because even though vaccines are now already undergo, but as a country like the country like Indonesia, you have 260 million people, so it will take longer to get everyone got vaccinated, even though it's on the target is only 70 to 80% of the population, but still a big number. But there has been number of discussion how to make sure children can safe go to school. I think ASEAN has come up with number of guideline for member states to help member state to have a regulation in terms of decreasing dropout school as well as to prevent child marriage.
Thank you so much, Ibo Yuyan. I'll go back to Miss Gina for her feedback or answer to the question, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would like to my answer would focus on the national level, since
Yes.
the discussion about regional was also shared. So for me, let's go back to the basic. We have to closely consult persons with disabilities through their representative organizations on how to make sure the availability and accessibility of government services, especially in the local government units, on how to address, especially on child marriage, especially now that we are, of course, we are expecting in terms of more pregnant women, and as a result of the pandemic or quarantine, at the same time, problem on employment and etc. And of course, how can we do that? We also, as organizations of persons with disabilities, especially the women, we have to educate ourselves. We have to know our rights. We have to know, we have to identify, for example, the CRPD, the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan, and other different human rights instruments to back up with our concerns in engaging with the government, in amplifying our concerns with the government and other sectors of society.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Gina. This question goes to Miss Emily Pradicit. In Thailand, government's intimidation of women critical of the government and in the increase of GBV cases, did the women movement collaborate with Thailand's National Human Rights Institution, and was there an issuance of advisory in response to this? Miss Emily?
Thank you very much for the question. It's challenging to work with the National Human Rights Commission because the current chair and the commissioners already have the mandate finishing soon. And as you know, Thailand National Human Rights Commission is not considered an independent one. It's still grade B. And so there's lack of trust between feminist groups and the National Human Rights Commission. And if you just look at the cases of the migrant workers, the 14 migrant workers in the Tamakasset case, which is a chicken poultry factory that sued 14 migrant workers for denouncing the rights violation they were facing through the National Human Rights Commission. The National Human Rights Commission investigation was not supportive of them. So it resulted in them facing defamation charges and being sued by the company. So there's no trust necessarily among feminist groups and the National Human Rights Commission. And of course, the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand does have a subcommittee dealing and looking at gender equality. However, the commissioner that everybody were willing to work with, which was the former Human Rights Commissioner Nkana Nilapajit, resigned. And she resigned last year precisely because she could not work independently. So if you have a National Human Rights Commissioner resigning from the National Human Rights Commission, and she was the one dealing with gender issues, it already says a lot. So it's very difficult for feminist groups to be able to work with the National Human Rights Commission as well, because we don't consider it an independent one.
All right. So thank you so much, Emily. I have another question, but I will read first the question for Gina so that you can answer the next question. All right. So this next question goes for Gina. Regarding the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025, how civil society and persons with disabilities and their organizations can use this document in promoting and protecting the rights of women and girls amidst the pandemic. And for the question for Emily, how Manusha Foundation empower women migrant workers in terms of keeping their income when they are not able to do their job overseas. And from your presentation, we learned that your organization also find it quite challenging in building regular good communication with your government. How can we learn from this situation in order to mitigate that for future advocacies? So, Miss Gina, this is for the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan. Can you please answer the question? Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Delia. So just to give you a brief background about the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan. So the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan is based on the CRPD, or the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So if you could notice, CRPD have many articles, but in the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan, it is more specific. So there are many key action points. It has 76 action points that cut across on different pillars in the ASEAN, for example, political, social, cultural. So I really appreciate the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan, because although there are many specific action points that pertains on the rights of women with disabilities, but we have to see the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan in an intersectional level, so that we can promote the ASEAN women with disabilities. And of course, we have to collaborate with other women's movement using the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan, because of course, as women with disability, our issues are cut across with employment, with education, with in all aspects of life. And of course, how can we amplify? How can we leverage our rights if we could focus alone with our sector? So what is important is we have to move out from our sector and reach out with other movement like the women's movement, different movements or civil society organizations using the ASEAN Master Plan, in which I believe that the phase 2 project of the all the ASEAN communities, especially the Call Foundation of the Blind, with the support and funded by IFES and Agenda, would be the next step for us to really leverage our rights. That would be all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. And for Emily?
Thank you. So I got two questions. The first one regarding how do we empower migrant women economically? So as I explained, Manusha Foundation, we are a human rights organization, and we work mainly on advocacy and campaigning when it comes to amplifying voices of women and ensuring that they are the center of human rights responses. So what we were able to do from our side was to send food, was to send clothes and soap to them. We didn't have the financial means to be able to send them money. We did provide them with donation, but it was on our individual capacity. What the founder of the Women Migrant Group was doing as well, she was also calling for donations around the Chiang Mai area with other human rights groups to be able to support the 20 migrant women she's working with. Among the 20 migrant women, half of them already found a new job. So they went back to the labor market recently. Otherwise, not migrant women, but we were also able to support women human rights defenders through emergency grant. So that's also something that human rights groups do, is that when you have women human rights defenders facing charges or who are in need of mental and economic support, which is the case of the transgender woman that is working at Manushya Foundation, as well as a young transgender woman, that both of them face transphobic death threats. So they need urgent psychological support and financial support for relocation. So we were able to channel emergency grant to them. But for the women migrant worker, we were not able to channel emergency grant for them because the Human Rights Fund providing emergency grant did not cover migrant women in the situation of COVID-19. And the other question related to how can we, if I understand well, the question is related to our advocacy to push back on an authoritarian government in Thailand. Can you confirm I understood the question well, please?
Okay, kindly hold on for a second. The second question is, and from your presentation, we learned that your organization also find it quite challenging in building a regular good communication with your government. How can we learn from this situation in order to mitigate that for the future advocacies?
I think when you're denouncing rights violation in a country where is a rising digital dictatorship, there's the civic space is shrinking online and offline. There's increasing numbers of arrests since the pro-democracy protest movement. There's an increasing number of crackdowns for against dissenting voices that are posting online or voicing their concern online. So the increased dictatorship is online and offline. And as a human rights organization, obviously when you denounce what is happening in the country and you do it honestly by calling out the Thai government, the communication is not necessarily going to be fruitful or is not necessarily going to be constructive. But it also depends on the channels that you're using. We might be denouncing what's happening in Thailand online through online campaigning. However, on the side, we will still be engaging in discussions or in consultation with the Thai government, leveraging on UN human rights mechanism. When Thailand is going through the Universal Periodic Review, or when Thailand is being reviewed on the 3rd, on its commitment related to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, we have to engage with the Thai government. We have to send our information to the UN. We have to do consultation with the government at the national level. So I would say it's challenging to engage with them, but we still have to do it. And we can use international human rights mechanism as an avenue to force dialogue with the government and to hold them into account on the international human rights obligations. Because we know at the national level it's difficult to talk with them. So we leverage international human rights mechanism.
Thank you so much, Emily, and to all our panelists, especially to the guys here who gave us a very knowledgeable and empowering presentation. Ibo Yuyon, Rachel, Gina, Emily, and Josephine. I would like to turn over the microphone to Tolhas. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Della, for your interesting facilitation on the discussion for today. We already have several encouraging messages that the participation of women has to be enhanced in the future. So the role of all stakeholders, government, CSOs, DPOs, private sector is also important to support this effort. So by having this, I think this is the end of our discussion for today, and I will hand over the microphone to our MC, Ms. Ratna Fitriani. Thank you very much for all the distinguished speakers, and that's all from me now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bang Tolhas and Della, and for more than, I think now become 39 participants who still stay with us after we having very rich discussion. Now, we have Alfa Nur Aini from the National Council for the Blind Malaysia to facilitate the summary synthesis and takeaways from the discussion. Alfa?
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, thank you to Ms. Ratna and also Agenda and IFES for giving me this opportunity to represent National Council for the Blind Malaysia to facilitate on synthesis and key takeaways. So from all the discussion that we heard just now, there are several key takeaways that we can get. First, promote and practice gender sensitive and gender inclusive approaches in all stages of disaster risk management, including ensuring direct participation for women with and without disabilities. Second, promote the voices and roles of women, including women with disabilities, in the recovery process and human rights protection efforts, particularly their leadership. Third, further strengthen regional and national human rights protection and redress mechanisms concerning the rights of women, children, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups in Southeast Asia through, among others, capacity building, inclusive engagement processes, and resources sharing. Then we also need to mobilize local organizations and communities for continuous data collection and campaigns to enable immediate policy responses in real-time base, concerning the needs and struggles of the affected communities. We also need more investment in online infrastructures, especially in rural areas, as well as ensuring greater access and equity among persons with disabilities, women in particular, to information and technology and communication technologies. We also must create an accessible and inclusive digital economy ecosystem for persons with disabilities, both as customers and entrepreneurs, including this includes accessible e-commerce platforms, funding assistance, as well as human capital development. And last but not least, we also need to encourage local businesses and corporates to create economic empowerment opportunities for persons with disabilities, for women, youth, and those in rural areas, in particular, by properly channeling their interests and capabilities. For me, that's all for me. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alpha. That's a very insightful key points and synthesis from our discussion today. So all respected participants, now we are approaching the end of this webinar, and please welcome Ms. Ernie Andriani, the Agenda Program Manager, to provide her closing remark. Mbak Ernie, the stage is yours now.
Thank you, Mbak Pipit. Good afternoon, everyone. Really sorry, the webinar is past 12 o'clock. I will do a brief closing remarks. This webinar is organized to celebrate the International Women's Day, and we have the objective to share best practices, challenges, and lessons learned in mitigating the impact of COVID. I think I can say that this webinar achieved the objective. The keynote speech from Her Excellency Yu Yun, ICHR Indonesia, and also from the sharing knowledge and experience from the 4 excellent speakers made the discussion in the webinar very interesting and very useful. I would like to thank Ibu Yu Yun and all speakers for that. I also want to express my special thanks to my team who organized this webinar. All the facilitator, Bang Tolhas, Della, Alpha, and the MC, Mbak Pipit. Thank you so much. With your contribution, we have a very successful webinar. Lastly, I would like to thank DFAT for your continued support to IFES agenda. Again, thank you very much for your attention. I hope this webinar give us new insight on women's leadership and participation in mitigating the impact of COVID. Goodbye, and hope to see you all again in the next webinar.
Thank you, Mbak Ernie. Okay, for everyone, we are once again to say thank you very much for your enthusiasm and participation, and we are looking forward to seeing you again in our next webinar with ASEAN colleagues, countries in Southeast Asian region. Have a good day, stay safe and healthy, and sayonara.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Gina, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
How about you?
I'm great, Gina.
So happy to hear you.
Yeah, me too. Long time no discussion like this, yeah.
Yeah. So happy to have celebration of Women's Month, the
Yeah.
ASEAN community.
Yeah. So we can reunite it again.
Yes. See you next time.
Yeah, okay, Gina, take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.